All right, now to, I think, something that surprised all of us when we saw it pop up. A stunning death of actor Malcolm-Jamal Warner, who rose to fame. You know that face. He still looks exactly like Theo Huxtable on The Cosby Show. And
Malcolm-Jamal Warner, dead at the age of 54 on a drowning accident while he was vacationing with his family.
When Malcolm-Jamal Warner tragically passed away in Costa Rica on July 21st, 2025, his wife made a bold decision that stunned Hollywood. She announced that his funeral would be private, and the guest list would reveal more than just names. It would reveal the untold story of Malcolm's career. For years, Malcolm had been one of the few in Hollywood unafraid to speak out, even when it meant sacrificing millions.
So reruns of the show have actually been pulled off of television.
Right.
I want to know, how do you feel about that?
Well, I feel several different ways. One, because the show is taken off the air, it's literally taking money out of my pocket.
Right.
So I got my own personal feelings about that, because it personally affects me.
After The Cosby Show was pulled from syndication, he didn't back down, calling out the entertainment industry's flaws at every turn. Now, in his final moments, his family is making sure Hollywood doesn't exploit his death the same way it tried to exploit his career. Malcolm had spent decades ruffling feathers, never afraid to challenge anyone, no matter the cost. He burned bridges with co-stars, confronted hip-hop legends, and defended controversial figures when everyone else turned their back. His funeral guest list, it wasn't random. Each exclusion linked back to specific feuds with celebrities who learned the hard way that for Malcolm, truth always came before loyalty. The tension really began in 1996 when Malcolm thought he was finally getting his big comeback. After The Cosby Show ended, he struggled to land roles that could match his childhood fame. UPN offered Malcolm-Jamal Warner his own sitcom, Malcolm and Eddie, pairing him with Eddie Griffin. It seemed like the perfect opportunity for Malcolm to finally become the star of his own show. But this decision would soon teach him a hard lesson about choosing his battles. The math was simple. 100 episodes meant syndication money for life. Both actors knew this. Both needed that financial security. But the problem? Eddie Griffin's behavior.
Even though we were at odds, what we both understood is a sweet syndication. We were like, hey, however we feel about one another, we're gonna get this money. We're gonna get this 100 episodes.
While Malcolm fought to ensure authentic representation of Black culture in the script, Griffin was showing up late, unprepared, and causing chaos. That chaos gave the network the perfect excuse to start making changes. The show was canceled at 88 episodes, just 12 shy of syndication. Both actors lost millions. But for Malcolm, it was a game-changing lesson.
Ultimately, they cut us at 88. They were tired of me fighting with the writers about their writing, and then they were tired of Eddie's shenanigans.
Which is mean.
Whatever. I mean, Eddie is a nut, and I mean that in
May I imagine?
And even though we were at odds, what we both understood is
on time.
Right. It was a miserable experience. And I have my version. Eddie has, his version. I'm sure he's told.
Griffin embodied the type of Black entertainer who made white executives feel comfortable, chaotic, unpredictable, but never challenging authority. Malcolm, on the other hand, was the complete opposite. Professional, demanding, talented, and never afraid to stand up for himself, even when it meant confrontation. The differences between them were more than just personal. They were philosophical. Years later, those differences would become even clearer. As Malcolm spent his final years criticizing Trump's supporters,
we're talking about not just Mr. Trump, but I think Mr. Trump's supporters, people who voted for him. You voted for misogyny and hate. There's no way around it.
Eddie Griffin evolved into exactly what Malcolm had warned against, a Black celebrity publicly supporting Trump, making inflammatory statements that pleased conservative audiences. Eddie Griffin's behavior took a toll not just on the show, but on the entire dynamic behind the scenes. Karen Molina White, who Malcolm was dating during the show, later revealed how the network pushed to replace Black actors with white characters. Malcolm fought to protect her role, but Griffin's unprofessionalism gave the executives the ammunition they needed to make those changes. The Malcolm and Eddie disaster became a pivotal lesson for Malcolm. From that point on, he would never again allow someone else's selfishness to jeopardize his opportunities. That experience shaped every decision he made for the rest of his career, especially when it came to personal relationships and loyalty. And when it came time to decide who would be at his funeral, that lesson remained at the forefront. Griffin's actions had cost Malcolm millions, and Malcolm learned the hard way that some bridges weren't meant to be rebuilt. Some relationships were better left burned. This early conflict set the tone for the rest of Malcolm's career, a pattern of refusal refusing to compromise his values, even when it meant sacrificing money and opportunities. The entertainment industry wanted him to be grateful, to fall in line. Instead, Malcolm became selective, holding firm to his standards. That selectiveness, as it turned out, would even extend to how he chose to be remembered after his death. When UPN brought him on after The Cosby Show ended, they saw Malcolm as just another former child star they could manipulate, someone who'd be grateful for the second chance. But what they didn't expect was someone who constantly questioned their decisions, someone who fought for better representation and never backed down from calling out their racist practices. Malcolm's quiet but firm demands, insisting on black camera operators, pushing for authentic storylines, and protecting Karen Molina White made him a difficult figure in the eyes of UPN. But what they didn't realize was that Malcolm had learned a crucial lesson about the entertainment industry. If you don't stand up for your values from the start, you'll spend your whole career compromising them away, piece by piece. His experience with Griffin had already taught him the importance of choosing his collaborators carefully. But it was later, in 2024, that Malcolm's real education in making powerful enemies would begin. By then, he had found his voice through his podcast, Not All Hood. What began as honest discussions about Black identity quickly morphed into something much bigger, a direct challenge to the hip-hop industry and its role in shaping Black culture. Malcolm was done staying silent, no longer content to simply avoid problematic figures. He was now ready to call out the biggest names in the game publicly, and he didn't hold back. This wasn't vague music criticism. Malcolm had specific targets in mind, and he went straight for one of hip-hop's most critically acclaimed artists, J. Cole.
There should be a moratorium on both of those words in hip-hop because it's low-lying fruit, it's so easy, everybody does it to the point that it's corny. Like there are MCs who I love, who I cannot listen to anymore because I love J. Cole, but I had to stop listening to J. Cole because I got tired of hearing nigga and bitch
as much as
every 2 sentences because he's proven himself to be such a incredible lyricist.
In doing so, Malcolm declared war on a rapper with millions of devoted fans and deep industry connections. But this wasn't just about music. Malcolm was making a bold accusation that record labels had weaponized hip-hop to perpetuate harmful stereotypes about Black people. He argued that the industry had created content designed to promote self-hatred, all while making white executives billions. The backlash, immediate and brutal. Hip-hop came for him with full force. Social media exploded in outrage over Malcolm's stance. Young artists and fans saw his criticism as outdated, a form of respectability politics that tried to control their creative freedom. In hip-hop, where beefs and public responses are expected, J. Cole's silence spoke volumes. It was a clear message. Malcolm wasn't worth engaging with. Malcolm had been completely dismissed, but he didn't care. His decision to speak out was deliberate, just as his fights with Griffin and his defense of Bill Cosby had been. Despite the cost, Malcolm was willing to burn bridges for his principles. He believed that talented artists had a responsibility to their communities, and that certain language and behaviors were beneath someone with J. Cole's platform and abilities. This hip-hop critique marked a turning point in Malcolm's evolution. He had moved past simply avoiding problematic colleagues. Now he was actively challenging entire industries and calling out specific people. His willingness to make enemies had grown exponentially. The controversy sparked a generational divide within Black entertainment, highlighting the tension between the old guard and the new wave. Malcolm represented the older generation of artists who championed conscious messaging and community uplift. For them, the music was about more than just the beats. It was about elevating the culture. But younger artists saw this as an obstacle to their authentic expression and creative freedom. When Malcolm passed, the response from the hip-hop community was eerily quiet. Many of the artists he had criticized stayed silent, including J. Cole, who offered no tribute, no public statement, nothing at all. The bridges Malcolm had burned by speaking uncomfortable truths stayed burned, even in death. His funeral guest list would reflect those choices. The hip-hop legends he'd called out wouldn't be welcome. Malcolm had chosen integrity over industry relationships, and his family made sure to honor those same values. Malcolm's podcast criticism wasn't just about entertainment commentary, it was a bold, broader argument about how Black art was commodified and exploited by white-owned corporations. He understood the harsh truth. Hip-hop had been transformed into a profit machine, generating billions for record labels, while often doing more harm than good to the very communities it was supposed to represent. Malcolm's decision to call out artists like J. Cole wasn't born from personal animosity, it was about holding talented individuals accountable for the influence they wielded. For Malcolm, artists with genuine skill and massive platforms had a responsibility that went beyond making money. They had a duty to uplift and positively impact their communities. The backlash he received only reinforced his suspicions about how the industry operates. When someone challenges their lucrative formulas, the response is swift and brutal, but Malcolm's willingness to make enemies didn't stop there. If anything, it was just getting started. His most costly loyalty was yet to come. While his hip-hop criticism had already alienated him from much of the music world, his most devastating conflict was still ahead. When allegations against Bill Cosby came to light, Malcolm was faced with a choice that would ultimately define the rest of his career and determine who would publicly mourn his passing. Unlike his previous battles with Eddie Griffin's unprofessionalism or his critique of J. Cole's artistry, the Cosby situation forced Malcolm to choose between financial survival and personal loyalty.
I mean, they were trying to take Mr. Cosby's star off the Hollywood Walk of Fame. And I am in no position to defend him because I can't.
Right.
But nor will I throw him under the bus.
Malcolm chose loyalty, and it cost him dearly. His decision to stand by Bill Cosby, refusing to completely condemn him while also not defending his alleged actions, put him in one of the most dangerous positions possible. It was a nuanced stance, one that satisfied nobody and ultimately made enemies on all sides. Malcolm's strategy was to point out the double standards in how the entertainment industry handled scandal. He argued that Roman Polanski was still celebrated at film festivals despite fleeing charges, and that Woody Allen's films were still distributed despite credible allegations. But making that argument put Malcolm squarely at odds with the Me Too movement and survivor advocates.
You know, just look at just how the media is playing this whole thing out. And I can't help but think about Woody Allen, Roman Polanski, Stephen Collins, who it's very clear, you know, the crimes they've committed, but there's no one that, you know, has been calling for Woody's movies to be pulled off the air.
Right.
Roman Polanski is still celebrated. Stephen Collins' show still comes on.
To Hollywood executives, he became unreliable, someone who couldn't be trusted to take clear, simple positions on complex issues. The financial cost of that stance was immediate and brutal. When The Cosby Show reruns were pulled from syndication in 2014, Malcolm lost millions in residuals he had been counting on for retirement security. Malcolm was brutally honest about the financial cost of his decision. Supporting Cosby wasn't just a moral choice. It was one that took real money out of his pocket. His candor, though, made him seem callous to those who expected him to prioritize moral concerns over financial ones. In 2023, just 2 years before his death, Malcolm reflected on what had been lost because of the Cosby scandal. A reboot of The Cosby Show could have made the entire cast wealthy for life, but Cosby's crimes had made that an impossibility permanently. Yet Malcolm never expressed regret over his loyalty. He understood that sticking to his stance would cost him opportunities, relationships, and millions of dollars. But he did it anyway because it was aligned with his values that prioritized personal relationships and due process. Even when they came at the expense of financial gain, Malcolm's loyalty to Cosby was a direct extension of his earlier conflicts, just as he had fought for his girlfriend when networks tried to replace black actors, and just as he called out hip-hop artists. Despite the backlash, Malcolm was always willing to sacrifice his career for his principles. When Malcolm passed, Cosby revealed they had stayed in contact throughout the years despite all the controversy. In fact, they had spoken just 3 months before Malcolm's death about a concert. Malcolm was proud of that ongoing relationship, as it proved he had never abandoned his mentor, even when it would have been much safer professionally to do so. The Cosby situation only escalated Malcolm's pattern of making enemies for the sake of his principles. He had evolved from avoiding problematic colleagues like Eddie Griffin to criticizing artists like J. Cole, and ultimately defending controversial figures, no matter the personal cost. Malcolm's defense of Cosby wasn't really about Cosby at all. It was about his unwavering refusal to let mob mentality dictate his stance and his commitment to due process and complex thinking, even when it put him in the line of fire. Malcolm had witnessed firsthand how quickly the entertainment industry could turn on someone when it became profitable to do so. The same executives who had made millions from The Cosby Show were now acting as though they'd never benefited from that relationship. Malcolm saw the hypocrisy for what it was and refused to participate, even when staying silent would have been the easier, safer choice for his career. His stance cost him more than just financial losses. It cost him friendships with other actors, relationships with producers, and countless opportunities for new projects. But Malcolm had learned from his earlier conflicts that maintaining his integrity was far more valuable than maintaining his bank account. Every battle he fought had taught him something about the true nature of the entertainment industry. The system wanted compliant performers, people who wouldn't challenge authority or ask uncomfortable questions. Malcolm had become the complete opposite, someone who valued personal loyalty over public perception and complex truths over simplistic narratives. His political awakening would be the final evolution of this pattern, pushing him to confront even larger societal issues with the same fierce commitment to his values. Malcolm's clashes with individual celebrities were more than just personal disputes. They were preparing him for his final, most defining battle, a complete rejection of the political neutrality Hollywood demanded from its stars. His decision to defend Bill Cosby, despite the personal cost, had solidified his belief that integrity was worth more than industry acceptance. By 2024, Malcolm was done playing it safe. He was ready to make enemies of anyone who stood against his values, regardless of their power or influence. Malcolm wasn't taking a diplomatic approach with Trump supporters. He was calling them out directly: celebrities, industry figures, anyone who would back Trump while trying to maintain relationships across Hollywood's political spectrum. This wasn't the safe, vague celebrity activism where you post something about unity to appease both sides. Malcolm was drawing clear moral lines, making it clear that supporting Trump, in his view, revealed fundamental character flaws.
I think I have more hope for what the wake-up call does to our country. I mean, the reality is the pro-Trump supporters are a voice that had not been heard, and they've now made their voices heard. And that's one of the things we talk about in You Can't Hear Me, the frustration in trying to get your voice heard.
The entertainment industry thrives on consensus and broad market appeal. Studios want stars who won't stir controversy that could hurt profits. Malcolm's willingness to alienate half the country made him radioactive to risk-averse executives, but his political evolution made perfect sense when viewed alongside his earlier conflicts. He had learned from his time with Eddie Griffin that some people's values were simply incompatible with his own, and he was no longer afraid to say it out loud. Malcolm had learned a lot from his battles along the way. From criticizing J. Cole, he understood that speaking the truth would inevitably create enemies, but it would also bring clarity. From defending Bill Cosby, he learned that loyalty to his principles mattered more than any financial consequences. His podcast became his platform for dangerously honest conversations about systemic racism, industry exploitation, and celebrity cowardice. Malcolm didn't shy away from discussing issues that made white executives uncomfortable. He called out Black celebrities who stayed silent to protect their careers, pointing out how their silence only reinforced the very systems they claimed to be fighting against. The cost of this honesty was immediate and measurable: fewer offers, exclusion from high-profile projects, and watching less talented performers get opportunities simply because they were more politically palatable. But through all of this, Malcolm had found something more valuable than fame or success: peace of mind. He had built a life on his own terms. He married a woman who loved him for who he truly was, and moved to Atlanta to raise his daughter, away from Hollywood's toxic atmosphere. Malcolm's political positions were the final evolution of the pattern that started with his conflict with Eddie Griffin: a clear, unwavering commitment to his values, no matter the personal cost. Malcolm's journey had been a radical evolution. He'd gone from avoiding bad colleagues to criticizing problematic artists to defending controversial figures, and finally to rejecting the very system that had controlled his life since childhood. The boy who had charmed America as Theo Huxtable had grown into a man Hollywood couldn't buy, couldn't silence, and couldn't control. Independence came with a price. It made him more enemies than friends in the business that had created him. When Malcolm passed, the silence from certain corners of Hollywood spoke volumes. The industry figures he had called out, the celebrities he had criticized, the executives he had challenged, they all knew they weren't welcome at his funeral. Malcolm's political evolution had been years in the making, shaped by every conflict and controversy he'd faced. He had seen the entertainment industry's dark side: how decisions were made, how careers were destroyed, and how principles were compromised for profit. His willingness to speak openly about these uncomfortable realities made him a threat to the very people who preferred to keep their operations hidden. The celebrities who had stayed silent during Trump's presidency to protect their careers knew Malcolm had called them out for their cowardice. The executives who had profited from exploitative content knew that Malcolm had exposed their practices for what they were. His political positions weren't just about policy, they were about character. Malcolm had made it clear he could distinguish between those with integrity and those without it. Decades of making enemies for his principles had led Malcolm to this moment: a funeral that would lay bare who had been genuine and who had used him. When the news broke that his funeral would be private, with a carefully curated guest list, Hollywood's reaction was revealing. The same people who had marginalized him for years now suddenly wanted to be seen mourning him publicly. But his wife, who had watched her husband make these enemies for his principles throughout their entire relationship, wasn't about to let Hollywood turn his death into their redemption story. The tributes that flooded social media told the real story of Malcolm's relationships, the genuine ones and the opportunistic ones. And it was clear that Malcolm's final act, even in death, would expose the true nature of the industry he had so fiercely challenged. Raven Simonet, who had grown up with him on The Cosby Show, shared genuine emotion. Tracee Ellis Ross, who had been his TV wife on Read Between the Lines, posted heartfelt memories. These weren't fabricated connections for publicity. They were people who had maintained real relationships with Malcolm Malcolm. Despite his controversial positions and willingness to make enemies, even Bill Cosby, toxic as he had become in Hollywood, felt comfortable making public statements about Malcolm's death because their relationship had remained genuine, despite all the controversy. But the silence spoke just as loudly. The hip-hop artists Malcolm had criticized were nowhere to be found. J. Cole, despite being directly called out in Malcolm's podcast, offered no statement. Industry executives who had marginalized him because of his political positions remained silent. Eddie Griffin, despite posting a tribute about their professional relationship, wouldn't be welcome at the actual funeral. Griffin's unprofessionalism had cost Malcolm millions and proven every concern Malcolm had about toxic colleagues was justified. The funeral arrangements made the exclusions clear, without his wife needing to issue statements or create official banned lists. Close family, genuine friends, and real collaborators were welcome. The rest, they were left out in the cold, exposed for their true roles in Malcolm's life and legacy. Everyone else would be watching from the outside. Malcolm's cousin captured the family's perspective perfectly, emphasizing that Malcolm's mother had nurtured a legacy far beyond his celebrity status. The funeral would honor that legacy, not the Hollywood machine that had tried to control him. The exclusions weren't random. They traced directly back to every conflict Malcolm had navigated throughout his career. Eddie Griffin's unprofessionalism, J. Cole's silence after criticism, the industry executives who had punished him for defending Cosby, the celebrities who had turned against him for his political positions. All of them would be locked out. Malcolm had spent his final years saying that his proudest achievement was maintaining his integrity and finding peace of mind in his choices. His family's funeral decisions reflected those same values. They honored the father, husband, and artist, not the celebrity brand. They celebrated the man who had walked away from conversations rather than compromise his principles, who had chosen loyalty over career advancement, and who had spoken truth, regardless of the professional cost. The funeral became Malcolm's final statement about an entertainment industry built on exploitation and fake relationships. His family chose authenticity over access, genuine connections over networking opportunities. In death, as in life, Malcolm had always chosen to be himself rather than what others wanted him to be. The Hollywood machine that had tried to control him for 4 decades was finally, definitively shut out. The boy who had charmed America as Theo Huxtable had become a man who couldn't be bought, controlled, or silenced. His funeral guest list proved that some relationships survive controversy while others reveal themselves as purely transactional. Eddie Griffin, J. Cole, and countless industry figures learned too late that Malcolm's loyalty was earned through genuine respect, not professional necessity. They would be watching his funeral from the outside, finally understanding the true cost of treating integrity as optional. The funeral arrangements had been planned by his wife and family, who ensured that Malcolm's final farewell reflected the same principles he had lived by. They understood that Malcolm's death would bring out people who had ignored him in life, but now wanted to be associated with his legacy. The guest list wasn't just about who would be allowed in, it was about honoring the man who had spent his career making difficult choices for the right reasons. Malcolm had taught his family that some relationships were worth preserving, no matter the controversy, while others revealed themselves as purely transactional. When tested, the funeral would be the final test of who had genuinely cared about Malcolm versus those who had simply used him for their own purposes. His family was determined to protect his memory from being exploited by the same people who tried to control him while he was alive. If you enjoyed this deep dive into Malcolm's legacy, make sure to hit that like button, subscribe, and ring the bell so you don't miss out on more content here at Black Spotlight. We're dedicated to shining a light on the stories that matter, the people who've shaped our culture, and the truths that often get buried. Thanks for watching, and we'll see you in the next one.